everybody. Welcome back to the latest edition of Terrace Talk. Disappointment for Norwich City, of course. I think on the road against Hull, only a point, probably a game where they could have maximised the 3 points with the chances they had in the second half. But an opportunity to bounce back, of course, at Carrow Road this weekend when they face Stoke City. With that, delighted to be joined by Stoke correspondent Pete Smith from the Stoke City Live, Stoke Sentinel, to get all the lowdown on the Potters and their season so far. Pete, first and foremost, thanks for your time this afternoon. Let's get straight into it. Feels a little bit like a stereotypical Stoke season if you look in from afar, sort of the position in the table, change of manager, lots going on. We'll break down sort of a lot of those elements and drill into it in a bit more detail. But just the season as a whole, what's it been like covering Stoke?
Well, we haven't had any squirrels. That's about the only thing that we haven't had so far. But yeah, as you say, par for the course with Stoke over the last 7 years. Steven Schumacher saw through pre-season in the summer transfer window and then left barely a month into the season. A new manager came in. This time it was someone you know very well, who none of us had really heard of before. He was a lovely guy, Narcis Pelach, worked fiercely hard, but for whatever reason, he couldn't find enough wins to buy him the time that he needed to see the project through that he knew was going to be so long term. And then the flip to the other side of the spectrum with Mark Robbins, who another Norwich old boy, but obviously very experienced. And he's come in and he's been he's settled everything down. I think that's what you'd expect from him, and he's been able to do it. He just speaks sensibly. He's very honest in terms of the challenges that Stoke face at the moment, and he's got 2 wins in the last 3 league games. They've opened up a little bit of a gap between the bottom 3, and obviously need to keep growing that over the next few weeks, just to make sure they don't get dragged into any more dramas.
Yeah, you mentioned Pelach there. Of course, I think when Schumacher left, there was maybe a bit of a divided opinion on that departure. I think a lot of Stoke fans maybe felt he had a lot to give. Obviously, the season didn't start in the right way, maybe, but Pelach, not a lot of experience. I think certainly from Norwich quarters, there was a little bit of sort of apprehension, I suppose, around him and whether he was ready to become a sort of full-term head coach. But in terms of that appointment, only 3 months in charge. If you mentioned that project word, that's very often used around sort of these kind of coaches. Norwich are sort of under a similar boat at the moment under Johannes Torup. Do you think that was seen enough time? Obviously only 3 months in the dugout, not enough wins though, maybe just 3, I think, from 19 games.
Yeah, I don't think he would have had to be that much better to buy himself a lot longer, but you can't lose every week. He just had to keep Stoke away from the Wolf's mouth this season. But even heading towards Christmas, it was a leap of faith that he was going to be able to do that. And you could tell that his interviews changed. We spoke to him a lot. Stoke had a lot of games during his 3 months in charge. So although it was only 3 months, I think he had 19 matches. And we spoke to him about 60 times before and after each game, and the midweek as well. And you could see that his tone was changing a little bit, going from what he could bring on the training ground and the work that he was doing into the squad that he inherited to the solutions that he was going to have to need in the transfer market. And you could see that he was kind of grasping in the end for solutions that weren't really available to Stoke this season because of financial fair play constraints. So it was no shock, really, over the last couple of weeks of his reign that a change was coming. Stoke were pretty awful at home. And if you don't put in a performance in your home matches, then sooner or later you're going to get a knock on your door, and your time is going to be up. And so it proved. I mean, he's gone straight into West Ham. He's obviously really well thought of as a coach within football, and the players all seem to like him. He worked them really, really hard, and he had a lot of ideas. And maybe it was too much for the situation that Stoke find themselves in, and perhaps what he was asking this Stoke squad to do was probably beyond their capabilities. They probably need someone who can keep it a bit more simple and straightforward and play to their strengths, rather than if you go down inverted fullbacks routes or whatever you have. Either way, it didn't work.
Yeah, you say taking it back to basics. Mark Robbins, of course, as you mentioned, a former Norwich player, well liked, I think, down these parts, but certainly well liked in Coventry. That remarkable journey took them on to get them back to the Championship and almost to the Premier League. One kick of a ball away at Wembley against Luton. So How was he taken to as an appointment by Stoke fans? Obviously, got a wealth of experience. A very knowledgeable manager, done lots of really good things in the game. But I know, some fans might have seen that project with Pelach. Did they want something similar rather than going back down kind of the route of a more traditional English manager, I suppose?
I think the overwhelming consensus was relief that they got somebody in who was a trusty pair of hands. I think that was what Stoke really needed this season, and certainly at Christmas time, that's what they were calling out for. So I think most supporters would be happy. There's obviously still outrage on social media occasionally. Stoke played really poorly last midweek at Bristol City, and there's still an angry reaction to it. But Mark Robins has been able to win a couple of games, but you can't fix everything in one fell swoop. And I think you're going to find a couple of games here and there still where Stoke, the Stoke side that we've seen over the last few months, rears its head again, and you can be frustrated and they'll lose games that you don't expect them to lose, or they can't produce the kind of performances to win matches game after game. But hopefully he can keep Stoke moving gradually in the right direction, no matter how slowly, and they'll win more matches than they lose. Fingers crossed, and he can lay the foundations for a better time ahead.
Yeah, it's relegation sort of fears, I suppose, with him in charge. Maybe feel a little bit more, I suppose, optimistic for Stoke fans. I know obviously with Pelach, you mentioned, that maybe there was a fear that they were starting to get a little bit close to the trapdoor. His experience, though, Robins, feels like he'll probably do enough to pull Stoke clear.
Well, yeah, touch wood. I think after the Bristol City game, because it's so concertina down at the bottom, between, I think there's 7 or 8 teams who are really stuck in the mire. That if you lose one, you can panic, and if you win one, all of a sudden you open up a gap. I'm sitting here after Stoke have just won one, so at the moment confidence is quite high. But last Wednesday night, confidence was rock bottom again. So it's a bit of a roller coaster. Stoke have got to try to grab onto the teams above them and pull themselves out of this little group, and perhaps drag a team like Swansea into it, and give themselves a little bit of breathing space. It's very draining, exhausting at the moment. The roller coaster of emotions that you have from game to game, and as you say, this has been the case at Stoke for most of the last 6-7 seasons.
Yeah, we'll just touch a little bit on the January transfer window and what Stoke have done in terms of business. Obviously, losing Tom Cannon, being recalled by Leicester initially and then sent out on a permanent, loan with an option to Sheffield United. Obviously, you managed to bring in Al-Hamadi from Ipswich, who a lot of Norwich fans maybe don't want me to mention on this channel. Of course, recalled Nathan Lowe from his pretty good loan spell at Walsall, seemed to be flying down there. So I suppose firepower is maybe an area that clearly from those signings that needed to be addressed. Wilson Esbrand, of course, well known from obviously Coventry for Mark Robins as well. So what have Stoke fans made of that business as a whole?
Well, this was Mark Robins' most difficult challenge, probably. Stoke were the lowest scorers in the Championship, and he had to try to address that at the same time as losing Tom Cannon, which is very hard. So, I mean, it was a no-brainer to call Nathan Lowe back from his loan at Walsall, where he'd scored 18 goals before Christmas, and then to bring in Al-Hamadi, who I think a lot of teams in the Championship would have wanted. Stoke managed to get themselves to the front of the queue, and he is what his reputation is: really hard-working, full of energy. He scored on his debut, which helps, and we think he'll get a few more. He's given early indications that he'll be desperate to get into positions which from where he can score goals. Nathan Lowe might have to bide his time a little bit more than that, but Sam Gallagher is hoping to be back soon as well. So hopefully there's a little bit more firepower around than has been over the last few months. But because the FFP profit and sustainability rules have been so tight with Stoke this season, there wasn't much room to manoeuvre in January, so they just had to make sure that what business they did do, they got it right. Al-Hamadi hadn't played really at all for Ipswich over the last 12 months. He'd been used as a sub, but probably less frequently in the Premier League. So it's a case of him finding his feet now and proving that he can score goals at this level and be a nuisance. He'll certainly give it his all, and I'm sure he'll be desperate to do so on Saturday in particular.
Yeah, moving the attention to sort of the back of the pitch. One player that made the switch, of course, from Norwich to Stoke last summer, Ben Gibson, featured a relative amount, I suppose, for Stoke. I've sort of seen more recently, maybe being on the bench. So what's his season been like so far at the Potteries?
Well, tough. I would say that he would say himself. He's been getting a lot of stick at the moment. He's a senior player in a team which has been struggling, and he's the captain of it. And I think he probably has had to shoulder a lot of that flack. He's stood to be counted at times. Scored a couple of goals. Scored a couple of own goals as well. But I thought he was all right. Probably in the run up to December, Stoke were doing a lot of defending under Narcisse Pelach, and Gibson was ready to defend his own box. And then around Boxing Day, I think he went off. He was ill during a game with Leeds, and then he got injured, and he hasn't really got his way back in the team since then. He's been behind Ben Wilmot and Michael Rose, as well as Ashley Phillips in the pecking order. And he came back in the FA Cup game against Cardiff last week, and he had quite a difficult afternoon because he hadn't played for the best part of a month and a half. And then he had another difficult night at Bristol City, and then he dropped out again at the weekend. So he'll be wanting to kickstart his Stoke career at some point. It feels like it's been a bit stop-start so far, and certainly hasn't won enough matches for his own liking. But I know he's well respected in the changing room, and the players and the coaches think highly of him. But he's got to prove himself to supporters who only see him at 3:00 on a Saturday as well.
Yeah, that sort of feels a little bit familiar, sort of his tale at the end of Norwich. Well-liked character, still very highly regarded by those within the Norwich circles, but maybe the fans were starting to see errors on the pitch coming a little bit too often. In terms of the reverse game, obviously 1-1 at the Bet365 earlier in the season. Antti Sienat opening the scoring on that occasion. Manhoff with the goal just before half-time. I think Nunez had one that was very well saved by Johansson off the top of my head. So in terms of reflections from that game, I'd imagine we're going to expect a little bit of a different encounter to what we saw on that particular occasion.
Yeah, it's so long ago. It was 2 managers ago, I think. Narcisse was in charge of that game. Mal Robbins, his big thing has been trying to take the handbrake off a little bit. He thinks that the best way that he can get results from this it's a very young Stoke squad, is to get them playing with a bit more confidence. And whereas Narcisse was getting them sitting very deep and being prepared to defend their box a lot and concede a lot of shots in the process, he's been keen to get them further up the pitch and try to solve that problem that they've had at the other end. So I think it'll be a little bit more of an attacking Stoke side than it was around that time. Although the Norwich performance was one of Stoke's better under Pelach. But yeah, they've blew hot and cold a little bit, as I spoke about. But they've probably had more encouraging games than not. They've had 2 stinkers under Robin so far, one at Portsmouth and one at Bristol City. But the rest is you've left with at least reason for encouragement. And they've won away at Sunderland in the Cup, and they won away at Hull in the league. So they're not seen as bonus games in particular. So they'll be looking to go and give a Norwich side a decent game of it on Saturday.
In terms of a key man from the Stoke camp for Saturday's clash, if you had to pick an individual, who'd you go for? I know Johansson's obviously very highly regarded in goal in the Championship. The likes of Wouterberg has certainly got quality, but maybe I know this season's been a little bit difficult. But I read a piece earlier that maybe he's found his form a little bit more recently. So if you had to pick an individual, who'd you go for?
Well, Berger limped off as well last Saturday, so we're waiting on an update on his injury at the moment. So everybody's fingers are crossed around here. Manhoef came back last Saturday, and he set up a goal from the bench. So he'll be a key player. If Stoke can keep him fit, he's missed 2 or 3 months with a knee injury. So it's big to have him back. He's a goal threat. He's built a bit like Xherdan Shaqiri, who I remember actually having a blinder at Norwich just after he'd signed for Stoke. What was coming up to a decade ago, which is making me feel a little bit old. He built like him, very squat, but very tough to get off the ball, and he's got a powerful shot when he has space. And Bae-Jun Ho, who scored his first goal of the season last weekend, he was Player of the Year last year and seemed to be finding his form as the season went on. But he played about 90 games, 70 games or something for club and country over the previous season, and he's been exhausted this year. He's been left out a little bit by Robbins over the last couple of months. But then last weekend, you could just see he was kind of finding his best form again. And if he can do that, it'll be a real bonus for Stoke, because I think in recent weeks, people have been prepared to almost rule him out this season. So if Mark Robbins can get him impacting games and influencing matches, then that'll be a big plus.
Yeah, obviously in terms of injuries and suspensions, have Stoke got any key players missing for this clash? Obviously, we're recording this prior to press conferences and things. These things can change. Norwich know that all too well this season with midfield injuries, etc., etc. So, any long-term absentees or anybody you expect to not be making the trip to Norfolk?
Well, Sam Gallagher's been out since the start of January. He's just on the way back now. Ben Pearson made his first appearance last weekend, or first start since the Norwich game at home last year, so last March. So that's a big plus to get him back. Ben Wilmot has been missing with a foot injury. Manhoof's been out for 2 or 3 months with a knee problem. Eric Bocat, the left back, has been missing with a calf problem. Wilson Esbrand, who they brought in January, has been missing with a calf problem. The other left back, Ender Stevens, has been missing with a calf problem. He was hoping to get back to training this week. They've had some tough luck with injuries. Some of them have been injury-prone players, and you can almost accept it. Other players, you can just think, oh, they need to catch a break. And fingers crossed that they can have their best run of injuries in the last 3 months of the season, because they certainly need a change in the wind.
Yeah, with everything we've spoken around, do you head to Carrow Road with any optimism? How do you see this game unfolding? I know Stoke haven't beat Norwich in the last 8 clashes, so it goes back to 2018. So not maybe been a happy hunting ground for you guys. So how do you see this game at Carrow Road?
It's always a long drive back from Carrow Road. In fact, the time that Stoke won there under Gary Rowett was Rowett isn't a popular manager at Stoke. His time isn't remembered very fondly. And the player who set up the goal that day, Cuco Martin, is not remembered very fondly at all. That was the Stoke team that actually won it. I think it was the last Stoke team to win it at Norwich.
Yep.
We know that this Norwich team isn't the team that Stoke have faced in years gone by. So I don't think that the fear factor is certainly at the same level. But nobody is thinking that it's a given that Stoke can go there and get 3 points. But I think the hope is that they can go and give them a game, maybe escape with a point, maybe or 3, but certainly be competitive and at least take something from the performance that they can take into the home match against Middlesbrough on Tuesday. Stoke have found it really tough at home. And I think turning that around will probably be the key to where they finish in the Championship this year, rather than just expecting to win away matches consistently. I think we all know that can't happen, but it's a bonus when it does.
Yeah, you say pushing for a point would be a good result. If I had to push you for a prediction, Pete, what would you go for?
They've had a couple of 0-0s in the last few weeks. They don't have that much of a goal threat, although we're hoping that will change. So I'll go for a 0-0 and keep my fingers crossed that I'm wrong.
Yeah, not been many of those at Carrow Road this season. So we'll see what we get on Saturday. Pete, really do appreciate the time this afternoon. Of course, great to have you on the channel speaking everything Stoke there. Of course, all the usual content coming your way across our channels as well. We'll be down at Colney speaking to Yanisov Torup on Friday afternoon. Full press conference available on the Pink and YouTube channel. We've had a few interviews this week as well. Anna Spencer-Lamani interviews gone up this morning. So a little bit more of a insight there into one of Norwich's more sort of newer signings. Obviously brought in the summer on loan, but made permanent in January. So a little bit more of an insight there. Of course, all the Stoke stuff that Pete does, we'll link that down below. So you can go and check that out as well. So thanks for joining us on this episode of Terrace Talk. Of course, we'll be back next week when we make the trip to Blackburn Rovers.
Cheers, Anne.